Hello, 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 and welcome again to another edition of Learning Tidbits with Jeannie Malone. Today we are looking at the importance of characterization. We're looking at the strategies that help readers connect with characters in various genres. And I want us to look specifically today at the characterization Jack London creates for us in The Call of the Wild, one of my favorite novels. Let's meet Buck. Buck is a loyal royal country family dog. He's the main character in Jack London's The Call of the Wild. So why do we think Buck is a loyal royal family country dog? Well, we determine Buck's personality based on the details that are given to us in the writing that Jack London provides. We have descriptions of Buck's home, his family, his interactions with his family and others at his home, and we also have direct descriptions of Buck. So we have Buck's perspective and his position at his home and in his family. We have the physical appearance given to us by the narrator. And we also see Buck's personality as we see him interact with the people at his home. Now, before we go any further, I want to clarify something. There are many different types of narrators that novelists and short story writers will use in their writing. In Jack London's The Call of the Wild, we have what is called a limited omniscient third-person narrator. That simply means the narrator is not Buck, the main character. The narrator tells us about Buck as he tells us about everything else going on and all the people. However, he has an omniscience. He knows everything about the way Buck thinks, the way Buck feels, all of Buck's perspectives and nuances, everything about Buck. So it's that the narrator has omniscience regarding this one character. He doesn't have omniscience to know all the different characters' motives and thoughts and emotions. He only has this knowledge for Buck, the main character. However, the narrator is not Buck. He's telling us about Buck. So we'll see a few text examples and you'll get a better feel for this. But London gives us a clear description of Buck's appearance. He gives us a clear understanding of his personality and his position within the family in chapter 1 of The Call of the Wild. So this is established very early on. So we have his perspective, which is played out through that limited omniscient third-person narrator role. And then we also have his appearance, the direct descriptions of what he looks like and his breed and how much he weighs and how long he's been there at that home. And we also see his personality because we see his responses and interactions with the people at this home. So let's look at the perspective and the position. London begins the novel describing Buck's world from a third-person point of view, but it's interjecting Buck's perspective, that only Buck could think, feel, and know. And of course, that direct description giving us the appearance helps us to better understand Buck. And then we understand Buck as we see him interact with the people and the other dogs. And there's quite a bit of this in chapter 1. Now, let's notice the characterization through the setting. Specifically, pay attention to the imagery and the adjectives. We'll just briefly go over this because I go over this in more detail in a separate slideshow showing you more about the setting and the importance and the role of the setting in the text. So, Buck lived richly in the country. How do we know this? Let's read briefly here. This is beginning, this is the entire paragraph, paragraph 2 of the entire novel. Chapter 1, paragraph 2. Buck lived at a big house in the sun-kissed Santa Clara Valley. Judge Miller's place, it was called. It stood back from the road, half hidden among the trees, through which glimpses could be caught of the wide, cool veranda that ran around its 4 sides. The house was approached by graveled driveways, which wound about through wide, spreading lawns, and under the interlacing boughs of tall poplars. At the rear, things were on an even more spacious scale than at the front. There were great stables where a dozen grooms and boys held forth, rows of vine-clad servants' cottages, and an endless and orderly array of outhouses. Long grape arbors, green pastures, orchards, and berry patches. Then there was the pumping plant for the artesian well. And the big cement tank where Judge Miller's boys took their morning plunge and kept cool in the hot afternoon. So we see Buck's role at Judge Miller's place. Let's look at the very next paragraph, just a couple of sentences that we will see in this very next paragraph, paragraph 2 and then in paragraph 3. We see, and over this great domain, the great domain we just described, over this great domain Buck ruled. Here he was born, and here he lived the 4 years of his life. All right, so we get some details here. We know that Buck was born here, and he's always lived here. It's just, this has always been his home, and he has a privileged position here. Now, further down in paragraph 3, we see Buck was neither house dog nor kennel dog. The whole realm was his. That leads us to believe he can come and go as he pleases. He's very welcome to be with the family, but he's also allowed to go outside and roam and adventure as much as he would like. Also in paragraph 3, at the end of that paragraph, we see he was king over all creeping, crawling, flying things of Judge Miller's place, humans included. So we see some things about Buck, and I want us to take a little bit closer look at this passage, but I wanted you to go ahead and see these very important sentences that kind of give us Buck's position here. But now read this entire paragraph, now that we've noted, okay, I know Buck's great position at this place. I know his place in the family. I know his allowances and his freedoms. So let's read a little bit more in detail, okay? Buck was neither house dog nor kennel dog. He plunged into the swimming tank or went hunting with the judge's sons. He escorted Molly and Alice, the judge's daughters, on long twilight or early morning rambles. On wintry nights he lay at the judge's feet before the roaring library fire. He carried them in the grass and guarded their footsteps through wild adventures down to the fountain in the stable yard, and even beyond, where the paddocks were, and the berry patches. For he was king of all creeping, crawling, flying things of Judge Miller's place, humans included. All right, guys, so what do we see about his interactions with these humans here? We see that he's always with these kids as they're roaming and playing on the property. And we see that he's always with the judge. The kind of judge would be the human king of the palace. And Buck is like the canine king of this palace. The one that kind of takes care of everything and is responsible for taking care of everything, but is also very respected. So it's kind of like, maybe in Buck's mind, he has the canine version of Judge Miller's role. All right, so what can we summarize about Buck's role in the family? His role is well established. He's been in this role since birth. He is very well respected. He is very endeared, very loved. He's welcome to take part in the many family activities in which no other dogs are invited or allowed. We see his physical description here. We know that from other writing in the novel in chapter 1, we know that Buck's not the only dog on the property. There are many, many other dogs, but no other dog has the same privileges, the same rights. No other dog is so revered as Buck is. So let's look at the physical description, which is also going to tell us a little more about his role. His father, Elmo, a huge St. Bernard, had been the judge's inseparable companion. There we find out a little more about why Buck is so important. And Buck bid fair to follow in the way of his father. He was not so large. He weighed only 140 pounds. That's still a very, very big dog. That's bigger than a lot of humans. For his mother, Shep, had been a Scotch shepherd dog. So we find that he's half St. Bernard, half Scotch Shepherd, and we also see something about his role. His father had been the judge's inseparable companion, and now that is Buck's role. And it has been since he's been there for 4 years, since birth. So let's look more about Buck's life at Judge Miller's place. Like some of the wild adventures that he gets to go on. It says, nevertheless, 140 pounds, to which was added the dignity that comes of good living and universal respect, enabled him to carry himself in right royal fashion. During the 4 years since his puppyhood, he had lived the life of a sated aristocrat. He had a fine pride in himself, was even a trifle egotistical, as country gentlemen sometimes become because of their insular situation. But he had saved himself by not becoming a mere pampered house dog. Hunting and kindred outdoor delights had kept down the fat and hardened his muscles, and to him, as the cold tubbing races, the love of water had been a tonic and a health preserver. So we get a lot of Buck's perspective here. We get his input. We're injected with his own opinion of himself, his situation, and the result of his choices of physical activity. So I find this very interesting here. But again, remember, it is not Buck that's the narrator. It's that limited, omniscient third-person narrator telling us this, through which he knows Buck's feelings, Buck's emotions, Buck's perspective, his thoughts, everything, his motives. So let's summarize what we know about Buck so far. He had a respected, safe place of importance in Judge Miller's family and home. Not just one or the other, but both. It was a package deal. And we know that he lives a life of comfort, but not in active leisure. As Buck told us, not Buck, but as we got from Buck's perspective through the third-person narrator, we saw that he did a lot of physical outdoor sports that hardened his muscles, kept down the fat, so that he wasn't just a spoiled house dog. So he doesn't have to concern himself with his survival. He's very well taken care of. And we also see he's a very large dog, 140 pounds. He lives inside, but he does have the freedom to come and go indoors and outdoors as he pleases. He has a very unique role in this family, unlike that of any of the hunting or leisure toy dogs that we see on this vineyard. Because, again, when you read the whole novel, just reading in chapter 1, where we actually see the vineyard, because the rest of the novel does not take place there. But in that one chapter, we see that Buck is certainly not the only dog there, but certainly the only dog in his position, in his relationship, his role within the family and the vineyard. So, why do we need to acknowledge all these details? Why is this important? Well, London gives us a clear picture of Buck's appearance, his personality, his age, his health, his position in the family. Why? For a specific purpose. To get the most out of a text, we must acknowledge these details. If we want to really enjoy The Call of the Wild, or whatever novel we're reading, we want to pay attention to those details. Here, we want to pay attention to the details that Jack London is giving us about Buck. This will help us not only understand the current passage that we're reading, but we will also have a much better understanding of the larger context as it relates in later passages, as Buck's personality and all the different changes that his personality goes through. His personal metamorphosis is a large part of this novel. It is kind of one of the major points is the metamorphosis of this character. So if we don't pay attention right now to how Buck is being described, we're not going to get it later. So how do we see the change in Buck? We see the changes in Buck by how London is very clever in his strategies. I love this. This is where, if you're a writer, if you just like to write just for fun, pay attention right here, okay? How does London accomplish this characterization? Well, we see Buck through, we see the contrast, the changes in Buck by seeing the contrast in the scenery, the contrast in the situations. So, the setting and the action. And we also see the contrast in Buck's behavior. We see his needs change. We see his motives change and his responses change accordingly. We also see the contrast in relationships. We see the very big difference between Buck's relationship with Judge Miller and the family there to Buck's relationship with his kidnappers and those that he comes to live with for the rest of, well, for a large part of his life after this, we'll say, and not the rest of his life. Okay, so let's recap. What did this passage show? What does this passage here show us about Buck? Okay, let's try to zone in and see what we can figure out about the character by this short little passage. Buck had accepted the rope with quiet dignity. To be sure, it was an unwanted performance, but he had learned to trust in men he knew, and to give them credit for wisdom that far outreached his own. Okay, so let's look at this. There is an undesired situation, but there's a relationship with Buck and someone that he trusted. So Buck's response, he obeyed the person, he trusted the person instead of going with instinct. Okay, what is going on here? I don't want to spoil it for you guys if you haven't read the novel yet, but the gardener kidnaps Buck and he takes him away from the vineyard to sell him for personal profit. And Buck had come with the gardener because he trusted him, because he knew the gardener, because the gardener had lived there on the premises at the vineyard as well. So Buck knew him and he trusted him. And it says here, he had learned to give men credit for wisdom that far outreached his own. In his mind, humans had a wisdom that he was not capable of having. That is why he trusted them for his care. And he obeyed them. So when the gardener wanted Buck to come and he put the rope on his neck, Buck didn't resist. He didn't like it. Something deep inside Buck said, no, this isn't right. But Buck ignored that instinct and he obeyed the man that he knew, even though the situation was not desired. All right, so let's look at the catalyst for Buck's change. Okay, let's read this short little paragraph here. But when the ends of the rope, okay, this is the rope that the gardener has. Buck is on one end of the rope, the gardener is on the other end. But when the ends of the rope were placed in the stranger's hands, he growled menacingly. But to his surprise, the rope tightened around his neck, shutting off his breath. Then the rope tightened mercilessly while Buck struggled in a fury, his tongue lolling out of his mouth and his great chest panting futilely. Never in all his life had he been so vilely treated, and never in all his life had he been so angry. All right, guys, so right here we have a transition. Buck had the rope on his neck, even though he didn't like it. It was put there by a man that he knew and he trusted, his wisdom above his own. So he had ignored instinct and he had allowed the person he knew to put a rope on his neck and lead him somewhere he did not know or feel safe. However, the change came when that rope was placed from the gardener's hand, the person whom he knew, to the stranger's hands. So Buck resisted, and as Buck resisted, we see the rope tightened mercilessly. So what was the result of this? Buck resisted, the man tightened the rope, then Buck is in even more discomfort and pain, actually. And look at the very end of this paragraph. Never in his life had he been so vilely treated, and never in his life had he been this angry, so angry. So why is he angry? His response is dictated by the action that preceded it, right? He responded, he had this emotional response of anger because he was so vilely treated. And he had never been treated this way. He was part of the family. He was respected and he was allowed to do what he wanted, but Buck respected and loved his family, so there was never a reason. He never resisted anything they wanted him to do because he trusted and respected them. But now all that is changing. So let's look at this, identifying specific attitudes and specific actions. So, did Buck like the rope going onto his neck? No. Did Buck peacefully accept the rope? Yes. And why did we say he did that? Because he respected the man. He knew the man who put the rope there, and so he had learned to trust people that he knew and to trust that their wisdom was greater than his own. Did he respond the same way to the stranger as to someone that he knew, the gardener? No, because that was a complete change. He had only taken the rope around his neck and followed the gardener to this new uncomfortable place because he knew the gardener and trusted him. But once the rope was in the other person's hand, he knew that the gardener was no longer the person in charge of him. So what actions and attitudes surprised Buck? And how do these attitudes and actions affect Buck's own? Well, remember when that rope was tightened around his neck when he resisted? That shocked Buck because he had never been treated that way. Remember, he said that he had never been so vilely treated and he had never been so angry. So how it affected him is it created anger. It caused him to have these emotions that he had never even had before for any reason. He had never had a reason to be angry. So this was a completely new emotional response to him, and it felt weird. He had never had this feeling before. So let's look at what happens to poor Buck later that night. There he lay for the remainder of the weary night, nursing his wrath and wounded pride. He could not understand what it all meant. What did they want with him, these strange men? Why were they keeping him pent up in this narrow crate? He did not know why, but he felt oppressed by the vague sense of impending calamity. Several times during the night he sprang to his feet when the shed door rattled open, expecting to see the judge, or the boys at least. But each time it was the bulging face of the saloon keeper that peered in at him by the sickly light of the tallow candle. And each time the joyful bark that trembled in Buck's throat was twisted into a savage growl. Wow, guys, we really see a big change in Buck here. It's like Buck's not even aware of this change going on in himself yet. Because, he's used to, when he opens his mouth, a joyful bark coming out. But now that's not the case. Now his mouth is opening. And what is the immediate response that he's not even quite aware of yet? He doesn't even expect. It's kind of like a shock to him. Instead of that joyful bark, he is this savage growl. So something deep within Buck is changing, and not all of Buck is quite aware of it yet. So let's notice the juxtaposition. All right, if you're not aware of what a juxtaposition is, or if you've forgotten, just remember the part of the word that says position, okay? Position. So a juxtaposition, we're looking at two things that are contrasting, okay? An author will place two things that are contrasting in position close to one another to make a point, for us to see something specific. So let's think about this question. Who does Buck expect to see each time the shed door rattles? He expects to see a loved one, right? Judge Miller or one of the boys. But who does he see instead? He sees that saloon keeper, and it's not a friendly face. So how does this condition Buck for change? Buck has always expected something good because his life has always been one of comfort. He's never had to be afraid for his life or fight for his life. And so he is now in this new circumstance that his life isn't quite safe. And maybe something deep within Buck recognizes this before all of Buck does. So this change is it's like it's something brewing, like you brew tea, like your mom brews tea, and it gets hotter and hotter, and then it starts to bubble, and it starts to bubble a little more until it rises and it grows, right? So it's kind of like that change is starting down in Buck. It's like that water that's getting hot, and the molecules are starting to move around, and everything's getting all jittery, and that change just grows and grows, and we're going to see it explode later in the novel. So again, this is another reason you must read this novel. It is a must read for everybody's list. It doesn't matter if it's not your style of, situation, characters, and that sort of stuff. Read it for the sheer strategy. It's amazing what you can learn from some works of literature, because they teach us so much about how to read the rest of our literature or how to write. So again, it's such a teacher for us all. So as Buck adapts to survive his situations, do you think that he loses hope to being reunited with his family, or do you think that that's something that's still constant deep within him? Or do you think his core self changes? Do you think maybe he forgets his family and becomes completely, solely focused on survival, himself instead of his family? I mean, it's just a prediction. There's no right or wrong answer here because you haven't read the rest of the novel, assumingly. So if you haven't read it, just make a prediction. That's another reading strategy that's going to help you engage with the text. It's going to help you get involved with the story, take ownership, and get involved with the characters' lives and their situations and their responses. So again, all of that's going to work together for you to better understand and better enjoy it. All right, so let's look. 2 days and 2 nights after being dragged away from home by that gardener. This is talking about Buck here. It says, he was glad for one thing. The rope was off his neck. That had given them an unfair advantage, but now that it was off, he would show them. They would never get another rope around his neck. Upon that he was resolved. For 2 days and nights of torment he accumulated a fund of wrath that boded ill for whoever first fell foul of him. His eyes turned bloodshot, and he was metamorphosed into a raging fiend. So changed was he that the judge himself would not have recognized him. All right, guys, so we have that interesting limited omniscient third-person narrator here. Remember, this isn't Buck talking, but we definitely get the interjection of Buck's perspective here. That very last sentence, so changed was he that the judge himself would not have recognized him. Whose perspective is that? That is Buck's. That's Buck's point of view. But it's given to us through that third-person narrator. And I know I keep stressing this, but I think it's very important for you to get that and understand it, because if you're reading something and you cannot even identify perspective and you cannot identify the narrator, it's a bigger struggle to engage yourself within the text and understand the text. Now, let's look Buck's perspective. So, through London's use of that third-person limited omniscient narrator, we get the interjection of Buck's perspective, his bias, his emotions, and his judgments. The judgments on the other characters, the judgments on the situations he's in, though he's not that narrator. So let's look again at this paragraph to see Buck's perspective. Now, I've highlighted a few things I want you guys to pay attention to, okay? He was glad for one thing. Okay, and we're just going to read that that's highlighted. That had given them an unfair advantage. Whose opinion is that it was an unfair advantage? It was unfair in Buck's perspective, right? In his opinion. So he would show them, well, guys, come on. Like when you get mad at somebody and you think in your mind, I'll show him. Whose opinion is that? Whose perspective is that? It's yours. So we see Buck's perspective here. He'll show them, right? but is through that third person narrator. They would never get another rope around his neck. Upon that, he was resolved. So we get Buck's resolution here. He is determined to not let anything like this happen to him again. You know, he's going to get back to himself, to his home, to his family. He's going to get back to being the Buck that he knows to be, where he's comfortable, is what he's thinking. That's what Buck is thinking. You know, he's going to show them, he's going to fight these people, and he's going to get back to his home. So look at this. He accumulated a fund of wrath that boded ill for whoever first fell foul of him. You know, when you're in that bad mood, and you just think, the first person that speaks to me, you know, I'm going to chop his block off. You know, I'm going to knock his block off. I'm just going to punch him in the face, or I'm going to bite his head off. I'm going to scream at him, yell at him, snap at him, whatever it may be. However your response typically is. When you're just in that really bad mood, and it can just be one of those days when everything is going wrong, and it's not that any one person has done anything bad to you, but you are in a bad mood, and you think, just let somebody speak to me. I'm going to bite their head off. No, that is how Buck felt. Now, Buck did have a good reason, but I love the perspective here. It is very serious, but we also get that a little bit of something about Buck that we can kind of laugh at, because he's just he's so resilient. He accumulated a fund of wrath that boded ill for whoever first fell foul of him. I just picture that little kid that's having the bad day and everything's been going wrong, and being that first person that speaks to him once he gets to school after he's dropped his backpack in the mud puddle and everything, you know, and he snaps at that teacher or whoever, his best friend, and it's not, you know, it's not because of what they've done, but just because he is so full of wrath. He's accumulated a fund of wrath for all those bad things that day. So the very last part, we see Buck's perspective. So changed was he that the judge himself would not have recognized him. That is Buck's opinion, that he would not be recognizable in his mind. Like, he sees himself as this monstrous, vicious dog. Like, that his physical appearance has so changed because of this wrath, because of how mad he is. So, let's look more about this physical appearance here. The Red-Eyed Devil. Let's look at some more of Buck's perspective. So, the most recent person in a role of power over Buck called him a Red-Eyed Devil. This would be a man referred to in the novel as the man in the red sweater. This man was the man who was responsible for breaking the dogs before they went to their final buyers to work in the Klondike. So this man in the red sweater called Buck a red-eyed devil, as Buck snarled and growled and snapped his teeth in response to the man's hatchet breaking through the wooden crate to allow Buck out of it. So that the man is opening the crate to get Buck out, and I can imagine being inside a wooden crate with a big hatchet slamming in and splintering the wood at me. The hatchet itself and the splintering wood are very dangerous. And yes, the natural response of a dog is to growl and snarl and snap his teeth because he's in danger. His life feels threatened. So here we are seeing more of that change in Buck, that he is acting in response to preserve his own life, which is something he never ever even knew existed. It was not something he was aware of during his life at Judge Miller's place. So after this man calls him a red-eyed devil, we read, "And Buck was truly a red-eyed devil, as he grew himself together for a spring, hair bristling, mouth foaming, a mad glitter in his bloodshot eyes." Now, okay, sometimes, especially if you're a guy, a boy, you understand when you are mad and you're having that bad day, sometimes you just feel like you become a monster, that you have so much anger pent up in you that you feel like your hair is bristling, your mouth is foaming, you have a mad glitter in your bloodshot eyes. Does that sound familiar? It's a way that London is writing. to an emotional response that humans can connect to, even though it's very, very much a natural reaction for a dog to have when his life is threatened. It's also something that London writes that humans can connect to on an emotional level. So I think this is very clever here because, again, when you connect with the characters, then you get deeper into the text and you better understand it and better enjoy it. Alright, so while the physical description is given in that third-person point of view, we obviously get Buck's assessment of himself because he is just, man, he's a monster right now. So, let's contrast some things. Let's contrast the setting, the relationship, and Buck's perspective of himself. Let's look at Judge Miller's place. How was Buck regarded and treated at Buck Miller's place? He was treated with respect and love. He had a specific place in that family, and it was a good place of high regard. Now, how did this affect Buck's perspective of himself? He was confident, secure. He didn't feel like he needed to snap and snarl and growl because he felt safe. He didn't feel like he had to protect his own life. There was no danger in his life. It wasn't, I mean, he would escort the girls on their nightly or morning walks, but to Buck there was no real danger against his life. But now how is Buck treated differently? He doesn't have any respect or love. He's not treated in a place of high regard. So how does this current treatment affect Buck's perspective of himself? He feels like it's him against the world, right? That same feeling that sometimes we all get, it's me against the world. It's not a good feeling. It's not a healthy feeling. It's not a safe feeling. And so right now, Buck does not feel healthy, safe, loved, like he has a place or a purpose. He just feels threatened. So let's look at the tale of two Bucks. So Judge Miller's Buck was such a loving, caring dog, right? He was very comfortable in his place. He was comfortable in his own skin, as we might say. But let's meet the kidnapped Buck, that red-eyed devil. He was just watching out for his own back. Like, you better get away from me. You better not cross me. With understandable reason, because he is having to truly fight for his life here. So, Buck is going to learn the law of the club. I don't like this part, but much of the novel is, lots of the primordial law, and it is very richly written. It's amazing. But, this is something sad to talk about. The man in the red sweater calmly and relentlessly beat Buck into submission with a club. And I imagine it like a wooden club, like a big heavy stick. The man told Buck, "You've learned your place and I know mine." So that was telling Buck, that man was saying to him, "I have power over you, but I don't love you and I don't care, and you're going to learn you're just a thing." So here we see that Buck was beaten but not broken, because just 2 paragraphs after that we read he was beaten, he knew that, but he was not broken. And I have an ellipses there, I've left out a sentence or two. That club was a revelation. It was his introduction into the reign of primitive law, and he met that introduction halfway. The facts of life took on a fiercer aspect, and while he faced that aspect uncowed, he faced it with all the latent cunning of his nature aroused. So it's like something inside Buck was awakening to respond accordingly to keep his life preserved. So something Buck didn't even know that was within him has now been aroused. It has been awakened so that he knows how to fight for his life. So he knows how to survive, even though he never needed to learn how to survive living at Judge Miller's place. Something within him knew how. He just never had needed to access that. So let's notice the parallel structure of Revelation here. The man in the red sweater calls Buck a red-eyed devil. Then Buck sees himself as such. And then we are told that the man beat Buck into submission. But then we see a little later, Buck realizes that he is beaten, not broken. So you see that parallel structure there. The man called him a red-eyed devil. Then Buck sees himself as that. The man beats Buck, and then Buck realizes that he's beaten, but not broken. So, which of these expressions do you think best reflect Buck's current emotions and thinking? So, I have 6 different expressions on the screen, and I want you to stop and think about which ones would best reflect his current emotions and thinking. Let's just start right here. Let's just start, let's see if the highlighter will show up. Oh, well, maybe it's just not, oh, I'll have to do it on the gray. It will not show up on the black. Okay, you see at the bottom left corner, you see this one, sorry, sad little highlighter here. But okay, at the bottom left corner, you see this dog kind of, maybe not such a confident look, but you know, he's shooting his hands to the side, like, hey, gotcha, no problem. Or, yeah, whatever. Some of those thoughts, some of those words might accompany that expression. Do you think that's something that reflects Buck right now? No, I don't think it does, because that dog isn't expressing the same emotions that we see written in the words in the novel, okay? And if you need to think back to some of the words that we have, remember, okay, just think Buck had been beaten, and Buck said, you know, not that Buck says, but Buck thinks that he is beaten but not broken. Do you think that Buck is cowering down? Do you think that Buck is ready to give up, that he is afraid right now? Or do you think that maybe Buck has already been through the surprise, the being afraid and trying to figure out what is going on, to now he is angry and he's ready to get revenge? Yeah, I think he is angry and he's ready to be done with this. He thinks that he can just power out of this very quickly. As we see, this is a whole novel. He doesn't power out of this and get back to the vineyard, to Judge Miller's place very quickly. But we see his emotional response. Let's look at the very top left. The very top left. And I have to use the oops, okay. I'm not sure why it's doing that. I have to use the highlighter in the gray. Sorry, it won't show up. But right here, you see the little yellow highlighter moving? Okay, the top left. Yeah, maybe this face, maybe, like, I'm gonna get even with you. He is not happy. This shows a face of discontent. Let's look right below this, the smaller one, this to the left, the smallest full circle to the left. This dog looks vindictive, like he is scheming up a plot to make some bad stuff happen. And I think that would very well describe Buck right now, because I think Buck is strategizing, trying to figure out how he doesn't care if he hurts these people. He wants to hurt them. He wants to hurt them and get back to his life. Now, let's look right here at the top center picture. See the yellow highlighter? This dog to me looks very scared and cowered down. I don't think that describes Buck right now. I think that may have described Buck right before the gardener passed the rope off to the stranger, when Buck was still in control of the gardener. Perhaps he was a little intimidated because he didn't know the place. He wasn't used to being on the end of a rope. He didn't feel comfortable. All of his instincts from deep within shouted, "This is not right. No, don't allow this. Get away." But Buck was subservient. So I don't think this describes Buck now. I think perhaps it might have described him for a brief moment before the rope was handed off to the stranger a couple of days ago. Now, let's look at the top right photo, or not photo, but expression. This dog looks mad. He is like sweating bullets. He is so angry. His eyes are bulging from his face. So yeah, I think this pretty much describes Buck right now. He's very angry and very intent on getting revenge. So what about this picture down in the bottom right? See the yellow highlighter here, the bottom right? What do you think about this picture? Do you think this describes him? Nope, 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 not in the least. This dog is like, oh, for me? Oh, wow. I never knew. Thank you so much. No, not an expression that would fit Buck's current emotions, his current need for a self-preserving response in his situation. So I thought this would just be something fun to add to help you. You know, it doesn't always have to be, even though the novel is a very, very serious novel, you can approach it with a little bit of lighthearted comedy if that helps you to better understand and get a better grasp on the character's emotional responses. All right, so let's carry on that little comedy just a bit further. Buck is very agitated and he's ready to eat the world. So these are the pictures that we just decided fit Buck's current emotional response. We see the first one, he is not happy. This is riding on his nerves. So in the second one, yeah, I'm pretty ticked off. You better not cross me. And then by that last one, it's like, okay, yep, I have a plan forming. I am strategizing against you now. So I think this very well helps us to concrete into our heads how Buck is feeling and how he is going to respond and why he is going to respond that way in the upcoming text. So, Buck's character. Let's think about all that we've just learned. Okay, Buck's character is purposely revealed through literary techniques for us to better understand him and the text. So, let's look at some ways that this has occurred. We've seen that limited, omniscient, third-person point of view, the narrator. We've seen the action and the character metamorphosis work together. The setting has changed, the actions have changed, and the character, Buck's character, has changed because his need to respond in different ways to his environment and the circumstances he was in. So the harsher circumstances, work together to show this. And Jack London provides the context for the metamorphosis through that going from the safety of the vineyard to the very harsh reality of being kidnapped and sold. So this drives the more primordial driven Buck, as we see more and more throughout the novel. All right, the outer behaviors reveal the inner character throughout the novel. You see more and more of this as you read. So notice the change in Buck's character. So can you put these expressions in order as related to the story? This is going to be another strategy that as you're reading, sometimes it's good to stop and assess what you know. What do you know about the character so far? What do you know about the changes in the character so far? What has caused the changes in that character so far? So then you look at the action that has occurred and the settings that have been the context for that action, okay? And just kind of regroup in your head what you know about the setting, the action, the character, and that helps you to make sure you have a good grasp of everything before you move on. So let's look at these pictures and see if we can put these in order as the metamorphosis of Buck. Okay, how did Buck start out in the beginning? Which picture would best describe Buck? Look at all four of these. Yeah, very good. If you chose the top right, whoop whoop, yay! That would be the very first one. So I guess I should actually put a I should put that as a number 1. I'm going to put this in something darker. Let's use red. Alright, so this is the first Buck. Now, after Buck is taken away from the vineyard and he is with the gardener and then he's changed, his rope is given over to the stranger, which one of these do you think would describe Buck? Very good. If you chose the bottom left, you are awesome. So this one, Buck was surprised. It's like, what? Excuse me? Pardon me? What's going on here? I'm not used to this. I don't know. I don't feel comfortable. I'm not familiar. So I think this one would describe Buck. Now, what about after he is in the hands of the stranger and he tries to resist and then that rope is pulled and he's shocked and surprised and strangled? Which one of the 2 remaining pictures would best describe that? You got it. Awesome. Give yourself a high five. So this one would describe his sheer shock of, what? You're choking me. Okay. Now, obviously, this picture here, the top left, is the 4th picture of how Buck is responding, because he's gone from this happy-go-lucky dog to being surprised. What in the world? I'm confused. I don't know what you're doing to me. Then, oh my gosh, you're hurting me. I don't know why you're hurting me. To the 4th picture, okay, you are hurting me. I am clearly not okay with this. You have no intention of stopping. I'm going to stop you. So kind of that metamorphosis of Buck's character there in comedic form. All right, so if you are interested, if I've piqued your interest about Buck, read and relish more about Buck. Because, again, even if you don't think this is your cup of tea for reading, if you don't think you would be interested in a story about the gold rush and dog sled teams, you know, I'm just going to be honest, that's not my cup of tea either. But the writing style is so amazing. Again, this is one of my favorite novels, and it's like a 4-hour read. You know, faster readers can read it more quickly than that. I'm not a fast reader. But it's a very short, simple novel. It's a 5th grade reading level, but it's so enjoyable. So Jack London's masterpiece makes character study so simple and effective. You really can get how to do character study when you do it through his novel. The novel is less than half a day's read, and there are many, many excellent readings of the novel where you can just listen to it. You don't actually have to read it for yourself, but you can listen to someone else read it to you. I personally enjoyed listening to the recordings through the LibriVox online library. I found it on YouTube, and there are several LibriVox recordings of The Call of the Wild, but the one that I personally liked the best was on a channel called John Adams, and I don't think that was the man's name. They give a credit at the beginning to the person who was reading. I don't think that was the man's name, but that's the name of the channel. It's John Adams is the name of the YouTube channel. So anyway, but if you just if you do a search on YouTube for The Call of the Wild reading, you're going to come up with lots of results. Lots of people have read this and added to this library for us. It's a wonderful resource. That way you can listen while you're doing other things. And it's still great to read it on paper too. I would advise doing both because you're getting it through 2 different modes, auditory and visual. You're reading the words and digesting them a little differently than when you just listen to someone else read. But then again, when you just listen to someone read, you can glean a lot of stuff that you might miss if you were just trying to struggle through the words on your own, reading them on the paper. So it's great to do both to get the best and the most out of the novel. And it's free. I just love that it's a free resource. Why not use it, guys? So no matter what you're reading or listening to, try to pick out the details. Look for character revelations through the following: the direct description, the limited, omniscient, third-person point of view, or whatever the narrator is. Try to identify what is the narrator, what is the point of view, what are we given information on, whose emotions, whose motives do we see the inner workings of here. And also look at the responses of the characters to their situations. Practice adding in the details if you're a writer. So again, this is not just a reading workshop. This is a strategy for writers as well. So pay attention to good writers. I use them as a model, guys. Use the model of London's use of details, the interactions, the direct character descriptions, and the descriptions interjected with the character's own perspective, like we talked about that limited omniscient third-person narrator. Look at the characters' evaluations, their judgments. This is how we get to know the character, is all this stuff that he's purposely put in there. So write purposely, giving your readers specific details about the characters. If you don't, they're not going to engage with the character. They're not going to get to know the character. They're not going to care about the character. If they don't care about the character, they're not going to care about your writing. Okay? Just being real. Make it real for your reader. So every word from every character and every perspective has a purpose to further the action and the understanding of the characters for your readers, okay? Don't just put fluff and stuff and junk in there. Alright, so if you want some more tips on reading and writing success, show me some love. And I plan to do some more videos on reading and writing, and it does help to hear from you guys that you are enjoying this, it is helping you, and you'd like to see more. So please, guys, hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and share it with some other learners. If you know some kids in middle school, share it with them. I mean, I'm not like belittling you. If you're an adult and you're listening to this and you got something from it, awesome. I mean, I'm an adult. I got something from it, just preparing for it. So it can benefit us all as readers and writers. But I know that The Call of the Wild is a middle school novel, so usually 5th to 8th grade. Kids like to get involved and read this, especially boys, but hey, obviously I'm not a boy, and I enjoy it. I enjoy it more as an adult than as a child. I'm just gonna, be real there. So, you don't know who this is gonna help, is my point. Get it out there for me. Share it with more learners, because we're all learners. Just share it. I would greatly appreciate it. I would love for it to fall in the hands of some homeschool moms, some students, some virtual learning students, some teachers who can incorporate it and make their lesson planning for public school classroom a little easier. I appreciate it. I'm here to help you guys, and I appreciate your help as well. So thank you guys so much. I hope you have an awesome day, and until next time, keep on learning.